this cotton that started it all, that was the first cotton organic, was left in the dust with one customer in the world, and that is I went every morning to all the anthills and around the house and fed them.
That's great. I think it's maybe even led to you learning about pests and you learning about things in the future that helped you in the cotton world, perhaps.
My first love was hand spinning. But even before I began hand spinning, I had this thing for textiles. This was before it was cool to be going to the Goodwill or these resale shops. My mother always brought us to resale shops, and my game as like an 8-year-old was to go around feeling fabrics and guessing the fiber content. I was fixated with natural fibers. Back then, synthetics were sort of new and exciting, but I loved natural fibers and I was really into them and identifying them with my hands and feeling. Later, and this is the Summer of Love, 1967, and she takes us to this Renaissance fair, and there was somebody selling drop spindles. Fiber with drop spindles, and I of course wanted one of these drop spindles, and luckily I had been babysitting my neighbor's child and had the money to buy the drop spindle, and that's how this all started. So I loved fibers, I loved hand spinning, and then it went to knitting, and eventually I bought a loom, and I was dedicated to the fiber crafts, more so than other crafts, although I was drawn to them all. But I taught hand spinning to many older people in the Hand Weaving Guild of San Luis Obispo, where I went to college. And one of my students, her name was Dorothea, she had a daughter who was in a convalescent hospital and actually died while I knew her. And her daughter had been killed by handling dyes. Her daughter had been a textile teacher in high school and was teaching the kids how to do tie-dyeing in the 60s without gloves. And the metals in the dyes migrated to her brain and killed her daughter's brain, and she died. So at the point when I decided to go to college, because a high school biology teacher from Kenya I was going to be a custom hand spinner. That was my big idea of how I was going to support myself. And she enlisted me to join the sort of group of people that would be part of reducing pesticide misuse. And to do that, you have to know about the pests. And so you have to study entomology. You have to study the problem and come up with solutions that are valid and safer than just going around telling people not to use pesticides. You have to have some alternative. So she had, in high school, arranged an internship for me to work at a research institute that was working on the way insects communicate with each other, which is pheromones, they're called pheromones, and also insect hormones. And so I got exposed to these great scientists from around the world. It was actually funded by this famous scientist named Carl Gerasi, who made his money on synthesizing the hormone used in the birth control pills. And he used some of his money to start this research institute where I interned and why I went to college and studied entomology with this goal of reducing pesticide misuse. Sure. So when I read about who makes dyes and found that the companies that make dyes all began with producing dyes, then they started making pesticides. So the same companies that made dyes made pesticides, so I decided I would not use any chemical dyes in my hand spinning, hand weaving, hand knitting, anything in my textiles, and only use natural colors of natural fibers. So even to the extent, back then these fibers were not available very much, but the San Francisco Zoo used to let me go and collect the camel hair and the muskox hair. Can you imagine nowadays letting some kid do it and get their hair? But they did.
That's amazing.
Anyway, I was always making things with natural colors of natural fibers. I graduated, I went to the Peace Corps, I worked in West Africa, I went back to graduate school, I graduated from graduate school and was working for a cotton breeder who was breeding nematode-resistant cotton varieties when I came upon a bag of brown cotton in a drawer in the greenhouse, and of course was thrilled. Finally, a color in cotton, and the fiber though was short and weak, and that's how it started. I asked him, how come we aren't breeding this to be better fiber with such a great color? And he said, oh no, this was given to us by the USDA breeder who was trying to make sure all the breeders had access to disease and pest resistant cotton, because these cottons were disease and pest resistant, but nobody wanted the color. So I asked, why don't we do this?
The light bulb goes off.
And he's in his 70s and I'm 20 something. And I said, why don't we make a market for this cotton? And he said, why don't you make a market for this cotton? And you can have this part of the greenhouse. And he gave me good ideas. And that's how it started. I started out with plants in pots in the greenhouse. Later, I just thought cotton breeding is just too boring for me. I cannot take it. You have to do things in decades, and I can't deal with this. I was young, and I went back to working in entomology and pest management and had all these series of jobs in agriculture. But I had my plants in pots, and everywhere I moved for these jobs, I had my plants. But eventually, I didn't have enough space for the plants in pots, so I started leasing land to grow more and more of the offspring of the cross pollinations I made.
It's an amazing story, and thank you for sharing with us. I love the idea also that was in your head that said, "Hey, wait a minute! These metals in there were, were damaging people. You had firsthand knowledge of it, and you said, okay, if people talk about something that is organic, and you're going to spend so much time and effort in growing and building something organic just to dye it with a terrible chemical, it's like, what is the point?" So then it's like, oh, okay, why don't we just make it a beautiful color to start with? I think it's such an interesting perspective. So many brands out there today are like, oh, look at our organic cotton, and then just the filthiest, terrible dyes on top of it.
I know, I've never. So actually in the 90s, when we started getting this whole conversation about organic cotton going, originally, I helped write the standards for textiles. And they, of course, included no dyes except if they were natural dyes. But kind of the big industry people pushed, no way could we be limited to these colors, right? This is too limiting. They wanted all the colors.
Right.
And they said, if we regulate the type of dyes, then it can be done responsibly.
Right.
And if the dye waste is cleaned up and all this. So that was the conversation that happened. And then the massive, big organic industry began. And this cotton, that started it all, that was the first cotton organic, was left in the dust with one customer in the world, and that is Tate Yoko. This was, it's the wrong color, but still, it's brown. A tannin one instead of a green one, but it's this from here. These guys are all seeds of a plant that has one of those little cards. And they're all here till there should be enough seeds generated from this, double rows, to plant 3 acres in New Mexico next year. And from 3, you can go to 40 if it grows well. So that's what all these guys are. I think some of these plants still have their tags on them. I kept making selections, I kept thinking, wow, I can save the seeds and see if they'll sprout. I kept going, but I started with the ones that were the big bulks, and that's why I have the seeds to do. You see how all the cotton in this plot was picked? Yeah. And this plot might be one of those. I don't know, I'd have to see. This is Giza 45. This is a famous cotton. Do you know much about Egyptian cotton?
I just know that it's called Giza.
Okay, so I have this whole historical cotton section here right here, the history of Egyptian cotton.
They claim that it's an ELS, like a very long staple.
Yes. Yes, I'm completely in love with them. And I've gone nuts over Giza 45 of all things. When I was young, it was true, I was young once. And when I was young, the cotton was the big deal. I was growing thousands of acres of it for 38 mills around the world. And I used to go and visit the mills, the customers, once a year. I got, you could get these round the world tickets for $3,500.
Cool.
But you had to be gone 6 weeks minimum. So I would go and stop and see my customers once a year. And I was young, 35, and the mill owners tended to be old, in their 70s. Again, my life has constantly been the one young person that's listening to the old people, which is not so common, right? Maybe it's common in your generation. In my generation, a lot of people didn't want to hear what the old people had to say. I treasured this. So I would ask every mill, every spinner at every mill, what was the favorite cotton you've ever spun? Because I want to know what they want, right? In my selecting, I'm selecting for cottons that I think are good by the way it spins, or my idea of how these numbers that the lab comes up with, how they correspond to the machinery. But I'm a hand spinner, not a machine spinner. And I really need to know what the machine people think. So anywhere I went in the world, every spinner who was not a young person, who most of them were 70s, even 80s, would always say the favorite cotton they ever spun was Giza 45. Giza 45. Okay, I've heard of Gizas, but what's Giza 45? Well, it was in the 50s and grown until the 60s, and they stopped growing it, and now they have new Gizas. They're up to Giza 101 or something. So originally all those names like Ashmuni, Midafifi, they were names before Egypt was its own country. And I think when the Egyptians got their own nation, they started naming their cottons Giza, Giza 1, Giza 2.
I think one of the amazing things about you, and if you really read more about Sally, is how resilient you are, and because there's just so many things that are kind of like fighting against this amazing thing that you're doing, like pests, for example, and wildfires here in California. There's mountain lions trying to kill your sheep and your dogs, and there's coyotes, and there's sometimes droughts, and it's just and of course there's the mass industry was trying to shut you down. So many things, but you're so resilient. You've been doing it for decades, and the result is something that is so rare and so beautiful. So we thank you so much for your resilience and for being so strong and amazing.
Well, thank you, but it's not me, it's the cotton. So what happens is when you're around this cotton, you get stronger. That's my theory, right? Like, how could I have done all this?
That's what I mean. It's
There's
almost.
No way. It's
I know.
The cotton. Look at. I'm wearing the socks. This is your jeans.
Oh,
right?
Sally Fox in some naked and famous denim jeans.
Look at. I'm wearing it, and the thing is, this is what's next to your skin.
That's right.
So I have this whole theory, and I'm wearing Wonder Looper.
There you go.
So I have this theory that it's the cotton that gives me the strength, because I am not I'm not some superhuman. I'm just a human wearing these cottons. These cottons have the strength. That's my theory.
Okay, you guys heard it here first. If you want to be superhuman like Sally, you must wear Foxfibre cotton right on your skin. Thank you again, Sally. Appreciate you. And we hope to see you again soon next time.
Yes, I look forward to it. That was fun.
Thanks, guys.
Bye.